Okay, right, back with another quick fit. This time it's again going to be a bit of a longer one, but I want to take a look at how long pillboxes were actively in use for and the period in which they were built. You might be quite surprised, but it's a much shorter space of time than you may think. So today is often assumed, or from what I've seen, it's often assumed that pillboxes were built throughout the entirety of the Second World War, from 1939 to 1945. But the reality is that pillboxes had an extremely short shelf life, as I call it, for a defensive structure in the UK. In fact, just today, or just the other day, in fact, I saw a mention on Facebook of a pillbox built in Ireland in 1939. I think it was in a football stadium or something. I was like, no, surely not. I'd love to see the evidence of that. Anyway, that's an aside. Let's, as always, start by trying to work out when pillboxes were first built. So generally, I have a look at Dobinson to try and get a broad overview of as a source of information, because a lot of his research is backed up by primary sources, and this is what I got here. So Dobinson outlines that the earliest pillboxes were built between May and early June 1940, but it's worth pointing out here that there's no footnote and no reference for this provided. So what I've decided to do is take a look at the source of information that I have, the primary source of information that I have, to try and corroborate this, to work out to work out when pillboxes started to be built. And to do this, I've started by taking a look at the units that built, that were on the ground building pillboxes, and these were the Royal Engineer Field Companies of the Home Forces. So currently the documentary evidence that I have access to, primarily the Royal Engineer Field Company war diaries, corroborate this to a certain degree. So from what I've seen, dates for construction commencing generally point to about early June 1940. So I have to point out here, this is in the areas that I'm currently researching or primarily focused on, these being East Yorkshire and Norfolk. And I'm going to point out for those who haven't seen these videos before that despite modern belief, both these areas were on the front line in terms of invasion threat in 1940. At this time, see my previous videos for a bit more detail on this. So starting with the 251st Field Park Company Royal Engineers, so these are a slightly different unit. They were generally responsible for finding resources for construction, but they, in Norfolk, this unit were involved in construction themselves. So the 251st Field Company were based inland in central Norfolk around the Thetford area, which ties in with my Thetford research. And they first mentioned that they were recceing pillbox locations for the defence of aerodromes on the 2nd of June 1940. This is the first mention that I find specifically of pillboxes. And they're starting the process of construction by recceing the areas that they're going to place pillboxes on the 2nd of June 1940. They further outline that on the 6th of June 1940, that contractors, so a local contracting company, are starting to build the pillboxes on the 6th of June. And there's also a further handover on the 11th of June with a Royal Engineer Field Company, the 561st, who will then take over coordination of the contracts in this area. So I get the impression that the 251st Field Park Company were setting things up first and then handing over to a field company, Royal Engineer Field Company unit, that would build the pillboxes themselves. So that gives us a good, by and large, shows us that in early June 1940, the process in Norfolk at least was being undertaken to build pillboxes. And then looking at East Yorkshire, for example, I looked at the war diary of the 257th Field Company, which also outlines that their recce's for the placement of pillboxes took place around the 10th of between the 10th and 12th of June, so they were recceing areas in Scarborough, Filey and around Bridlington, with contractors taking on the work of construction of pillboxes in Filey Bay by the 17th of June 1940. So that's two general examples that I've got from the documentary records from the units building pillboxes that kind of corroborate Dobinson's statement that pillbox construction started around early June 1940. And again, I need to point out that these are from just two areas that I'm looking at. I'm not looking at the entire country because that's pointless. I'm picking very specific geographic areas to focus my research on, but it gives us a good idea. This gives us a good idea of when pillbox construction actually started. So far, we've got corroboration that pillbox construction, or the process of that construction, started around early June 1940, but I haven't actually found anything that, well, I haven't come across anything personally that shows that pillbox construction started, like Dobinson said, in May 1940 so far. But anecdotally, I haven't got the documents to hand myself. Anecdotally, from some of the sources I've looked at, the Directorate of Fortifications and Works, Branch 3, which were the ones that drew up the pillbox designs that we all know and love, like the Type 22, for example, they started their work and drew up these plans in May 1940, but I need to corroborate that myself. So I do think that the primary sources that I've looked at here give us a good indication that pillbox construction didn't start at the outbreak of war, from what I've seen using to these sources. But as always, if someone does have a primary source that shows a start date for construction before May 1940 or even earlier, I'd love to see that, because so far everything that I've seen points to this date of around, well, construction starting around June 1940 and no earlier. But I'm happy to reassess that if I see some other source of information. Right, so with that out of the way, it's worth me. So when I was looking into this, I just started to think about the wider picture. So I was thinking in terms of when, from the evidence here, the construction of pillboxes started, and generally it coincides with the implementation of Operation Dynamo, that being, the first evacuations of the BEF and French troops from mainland France under Operation Dynamo, also known as the Dunkirk evacuation. And also around this time, you have a key change in the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces. So General Walter Kirk was replaced by the well-known General Edmund Ironside around this time. And I think this is why this construction of pillboxes starts, is that it was a doctrinal thing. It was based on the doctrine of Ironside, who had replaced Kirk. So Kirk had focused on kind of trench-based systems, and Ironside had brought in this policy of pillbox construction. So yeah, Kirk's defences, from what I've seen, the early defences built under the Julius Caesar plan comprised of trench-based systems rather than concrete fixed defences. So the way construction of pillboxes and these dates coincide with the change in the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces around the 27th of May, early June 1940. And how this is backed up by the documentary evidence is actually, I think that's pretty cool. And I think it's one of the reasons why we see pillbox construction start at this very fixed time, is change in defensive policy coinciding with this change in Commander-in-Chiefs of Home Forces. So yeah, I think it shows quite nicely how quickly, such changes in defensive doctrine could be drawn up and implemented by the military, and kind of shows here that the military organisation and implementation of the Home Forces was much more efficient than it is given credit for today. Golf Dad's Army effect, where everything is seen as as bumbling inefficiency. That's not true. We can see that this change of policy was brought in extremely quickly, and like I say, from what I'm seeing here, is that the start of pillbox construction relates directly to this change in defensive strategy between Walter Kirk and Edmund Ironside. Anyway, let's move on. So with that out of the way, we've got a general idea of when pillbox construction started, looking at about early June 1940. When did the next question we have is, when did construction of the pillbox end? So again, using Dobinson as a quick source to reference for a broad answer, in 1996, Dobinson stated that construction stopped in February 1942 following orders from Home Forces. But again, in a similar vein of trying to corroborate, or aiming to corroborate, what I read in published sources, and trying to corroborate this with a primary source, I want to apply that method again to try and get to the bottom of this statement. So unusually for Dobinson, again here, he doesn't provide a footnote or a reference to a primary source for this quote. So I've done a bit of work to try and identify where he got this information from, using primary sources that I have available. So yeah, as always, I'm quite keen to get to the bottom of these statements and work out their validity, which is something that's rarely done. Right, let's see what I've got. So I know I'm missing a big part between pillbox construction starting and pillbox construction ending, and that is something I'm going to look at in further detail in a future video. So I want to look at specifically the timeline of pillbox use as part of a future series on defensive strategy, which will be a big body of research. But that's why I'm not focusing on that here. I'm just focusing on construction date starting, construction date ending. Right, so I think I found the order that Dobinson's actually referring to, and I'm going to call this the kind of like the final nail in the coffin for the pillbox. And this came from this order here, which was from the GHQ Home Forces, so the General Headquarters of the Home Forces, which is the top tier headquarters of the Home Forces. And this was issued on the 23rd of February 1942. And it's not very clear whether this is a memorandum. So a memorandum is like a summary of things that are going on, or whether this is indeed an order. But I'm just going to call it an order because that's easier to say than memorandum or memo. But I'm not, just for clarification, I'm not sure whether this is a direct order or whether this is a memorandum, but it does look more like an order in that it is giving an order to the units of the Home Forces. So this is titled Construction of Field Defences, and this outlines the reasons why pillboxes as of February 1942 were no longer suitable for the defence of coastlines and nodal points based on the development of modern warfare as of 1942. So I'm just going to quickly point out, because I know someone will say this, I know I've said that pillboxes weren't built after 1942, and this file has a date that goes up to July 1944. For clarification, this entire document doesn't relate just to pillboxes and their construction. It also contains information relating to the reduction of defences in 1944, which is why it continues to be dated up until July 1944. So it has information relating to defences being demolished in 1944. So just kind of preempting someone pointing that out, all the documents in this file don't necessarily relate to this period 1942, but pillboxes were halted in construction after 1942. Right, so to kind of summarise this little section of the order here, by 1942 it was determined that pillboxes were no longer practical, essentially obsolete, in my words. They were no longer able to withstand, quote, modern weapons, and they would need walls of reinforced concrete so thick that it makes concealment of the pillbox itself, quote, very difficult. And also the wall thicknesses involved in ensuring this protection would significantly reduce the arcs of fire of weapons deployed within pillboxes, or adversely kind of require a dangerously wide embrasure to allow their deployment. So making, so you either have the wall thickness hindering arcs of fire, or requiring embrasures so large in the walls that they're dangerous, for various reasons, possibly funneling projectiles into the embrasure, or making the embrasure so large that it offers no protection. So it was recommended by the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces, which I think at this time in February 1942 was Bernard Paget. I think he'd replaced Alan Brooke in December 1941, but don't hold me to that. So yeah, it was recommended by the C&C of Home Forces that future field defences should comprise of well-sited, concealed and constructed earthworks, so essentially trenches, capable of all-round fire, and with secondary defended localities formed of trenches formed of because I'm reading a script here, formed of trenches located in a suitable position nearby. Essentially a carbon copy of one position was to be built nearby to offer a suitable second position. So this order also makes it clear that the now obsolete pillboxes would often occupied the best firing positions and may remain in their locations as a result of this. So it doesn't confirm or deny whether the pillboxes that already existed in these locations should be demolished or just go unused. But any surviving pillboxes in kind of like the best firing position should be provided with an alternative position comprising of trenches. So interestingly, the pillboxes I've looked at in aerial photographs in East Yorkshire, well, in particular East Yorkshire in 1940 and 41, were already often supported by slit trenches. So I'm not sure why this this was clarified, because to me it seems like something that was already done, but maybe it was just setting in stone that pillboxes, where not provided with a supporting slit trench, were to be supported by a slit trench where their use couldn't be avoided. So this order also interestingly enough also references a previous memorandum or order, I'm going to say, issued on the 6th of May 1941. So let's take a look at that. So this is the kind of like the official guidelines here from the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces, saying that pillboxes are no longer suitable for defence of coastal and nodal points, and that they should be, any future construction should focus on the construction of trenches, not pillboxes. Right, let's have a look at this order on the 6th of May 1941. So luckily, within this document referenced at the bottom here, it contains this previously referenced order, which was issued on the 6th of May 1941. So relatively, well, quite a significant period before the construction of pillboxes was officially halted. So I thought I'd take a look at this, because this order itself is particularly useful, as it shows that the order issued in February 1942 to end pillbox construction didn't come out of nowhere. And this order itself provides some additional context to why the decision in February 1942 was made to halt the construction of pillboxes and focus on building earthwork positions or trenches. So let's have a look. So the order of May 1941 outlines that many pillboxes built during the summer of 1940 were built to bulletproof standards and can't withstand high velocity anti-tank gun fire. In the subsequent period from summer 1940 onwards, tests had been undertaken in the intervening period, which indicated that it was possible to build pillboxes capable of withstanding such fire from heavy high-velocity anti-tank guns fielded by the German army in mid-1941. The order also states that the current Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces directed that anti-tank guns in the vulnerable areas of Dungeness and Dover to Ramsgate in South Eastern Command, and those in Southwold in Eastern Command, should be given first priority to ensure that they meet these new criteria. So it was identified that bulletproof standard of pillbox was not adequate to withstand high-velocity anti-tank fire, and all future efforts in these vulnerable areas should focus on building pillboxes with capable of withstanding this updated and high-velocity fire. And work should be undertaken to review existing defences to ensure that these new pillbox types are built that can withstand this fire, but also identify examples of existing bulletproof pillboxes that could be strengthened to bring them up to this new specification to be proof against heavy high-velocity guns. So yeah, this is really, really interesting that as early as May 1941 it has been realised that bulletproof standard pillboxes that were built weren't capable of taking on, this high-velocity anti-tank gun fire, which obviously would have been a key thing in taking on German armour. But they had put in place in the vulnerable areas outlined a plan to construct new pillboxes that were shell-proof and capable of meeting this new requirement, and also putting plans in place to identify existing pillboxes that could be strengthened to make them proof against high-velocity anti-tank fire. Right. So this little comment as well at the bottom of this order really did grab my attention. So it was already clear that the process of building shell-proof pillboxes and adapting those already built would take a long time, and there was this quote that there was no prospect of even completing a limited number of these in the future, which I find quite interesting, that in May 1940 this little thing here which says, it must again be emphasised that this work is a long-range programme and that there is no prospect of completing a very limited number in the immediate future, is extremely interesting. It's kind of defeatist. It's saying, yeah, we need to do this, but we're probably not going to be able to do it, which is really interesting. So kind of sets the context for the order issued in February 1942. Right. So what we got next? So the order of May 1940 also itself referenced an earlier order in this file WO1994/36 held in the National Archives, and this other order is dated to the 25th of April 1941. So we also have further context and further order that was issued earlier in April 1941, which further outlines the issues that were being faced in terms of pillbox design and their ability to withstand fire from anti-tank guns. So, this earlier order highlights that, as the May 1941 order outlined, that experiments had been undertaken using the 6-pounder anti-tank gun, which was a common anti-tank gun rolled out to the British Army in 1940 following the fall of France. And tests, so this, I'm assuming this wasn't the 6-pounder that came in like 1943, I think it was. This was the 6-pounder Hotchkiss gun, which was a short-barreled gun introduced, rolled out widely in 1940. Anyway, so this tests were undertaken using the 6-pounder anti-tank gun, and these were used as the basis for tests indicating that a new design of pillbox was required to withstand such a weapon. So if you look in the detail on this, model scale tests have been undertaken using the 6-pounder as the basis for this, and it had been decided that new designs of pillbox were required to withstand the fire of the 6-pounder. There was also, using this research, it was determined that calculations could also be made to determine the requirements to withstand the 88mm anti-tank gun or anti-aircraft gun fielded by the German army at the time, the 88, which gets all the attention today. And so they were quite confident that using the 6-pounder as a basis for tests, they could also extrapolate data to work out the requirements needed to withstand the 88 anti-tank gun shell, or the 88 anti-aircraft gun shell. The 88 gun. Right, so this order outlines that larger pillboxes with walls of 6 feet of reinforced concrete were required to withstand an attack by the 6-pounder and the 88 anti-tank, 88mm anti-tank gun, and that existing pillboxes practically could be thickened to meet this new requirement. So we know from this, the later order, that they were trying to practically do this, but they were very pessimistic about whether they could. But this earlier order shows that it was possible to do this. But it also shows here that building these bigger pillboxes and strengthening pillboxes was going to be a huge undertaking, and actually unlikely to receive the required labour as had been allotted in 1940 by the government to ensure the construction of these earlier pillboxes. And again, it also points out here that priority should be given to Southern and Eastern commands, as they were the most vulnerable at the time. I think this was, I can't remember if this was just before the creation of Southeastern Command off the top of my head, but Southeastern Command was created around, I think, December 1940 to split Southern Command, which was a large area, into 2 specific commands. Anyway, again, this is kind of reflecting what was seen in that later order, but we can see here that even in April 1941, it was seen that something needed to be done in terms of pillbox design to make sure that pillboxes could be built to withstand the 6-pounder and also the 88 anti-tank, 88mm anti-tank gun. Right. So, this order also draws attention to the need to ensure anti-tank gun pillboxes were constructed to withstand. Am I getting that right? No, just anyway. I'll take that back. This order also draws attention to the need to build pillboxes to withstand, 88mm gunfire at 500 yards, which is interesting. I haven't quite visualised that just yet, and I don't know the effective range of the 88mm gun, but this is interesting. They've got this range in there, and that the pillboxes should be designed in such a way that the walls ensure that they are proof against a grouping of 6 shots in a 6-foot area. So that's quite a tight area. That but it shows the kind of like the required specification for withstanding an 88mm gun. And it's also interesting here that protection on the roof should be given against a direct hit from a 250-kilogram bomb as also dropped from the air. So not just the 88, but also aerial bombardment of these positions was taken into account. So, one thing that constantly pops up online and elsewhere is the popularity of the 88. And people constantly harp on about, oh yes, an 88 would go straight through a pillbox, and pillboxes were crap and all this, and they couldn't withstand its fire. The army were clearly aware of the capabilities of the 88 and put orders in place and methods in place to mitigate fire from the 88 anti-tank gun. So clearly the army, the home forces, weren't stupid and were aware of the use of the 88, and clearly made attempts to ensure additional protection of pillboxes was undertaken to ensure they could withstand this weapon system. So conversely, this also led to the downfall of the pillbox, and later developments would show that the pillbox wasn't capable of practically being adapted. So it shows, though, clearly that the military were fully aware of the limitations of pillboxes, and used them up to the point where they were no longer practical or able to withstand the weapon systems the enemy were fielding. They didn't just keep on blindly building pillboxes throughout the war, for a laugh. They were fully aware of this ongoing process of assessing the capabilities of the enemy. Right. One final document I want to draw attention to is this order from Southern Command. So this, I wasn't going to put this in because, I stumbled across it. I was going to put it in, and then I noticed that the date was, I hadn't actually read the date, and I assumed this was March 1942, and it's not. It's March. This order was issued in March 1941, and this is really, really, really interesting. So I often go on about how there isn't a one-size-fits-all narrative for the defences in terms, there was multiple stories to be told across the country. Each command and each sub-command unit inevitably did things very differently based on the area they were in. And this is, I love this document because this is a really good case of that happening in the field. So often national defence policy was different to what was undertaken locally. And when you start to look into the documents, you see this popping up a lot in the national story, or the assessing the defences from the national perspective and the national orders. Gives you a very, very different view as to what was actually what was going on in the field was completely different in a lot of cases. So this document is really cool in that Southern Command had actually decided to stop building pillboxes after current contracts had been completed in March 1941. So this was just 9 months after construction of pillboxes had started. So just in case you don't believe me, here's the headline from the order, and here's the date in the top right hand corner, because just in case, I'm not making this up. This is 12th of March 1941. Right. So their reasons, in summary, for halting pillbox construction are summarised as following. So it was seen by the Southern Command that the pillbox hinders movement of units deployed within them and their weapon systems, and they stand out if not properly concealed. So this is highlighted here as they give a false sense of security to the garrisons within. Next, oh, sorry, I'm getting lost now because I'm reading off a script. Right, next, they also, stand out in the landscape because if they're located at distance from buildings, for example, they're very conspicuous in the landscape and draw attention. So that defeats their point because they're not concealed and not easy to conceal. So Southern Command quickly dropped the pillbox in early 1941 and started focusing on trench systems instead. So as it says here, instead of pillboxes, units will arrange to construct fire trenches of narrow types and solid revetment concrete where necessary. Moving on from pillboxes to the trench. Also worth pointing out here, though, that they didn't completely stop the construction of pillboxes. It was recommended that pillboxes should continue to be built for the defence of airfields, MAP establishments, which I'm not sure what that is. I can't find out what that acronym means, but I'm thinking military areas, MAP. Anyway, if anyone knows, let me know in the chat. But also to be used as well, continue to be used and built. Also continue to be built in areas where they could be fully concealed. So, yeah, that's really, really, really interesting. I love this as an order in that, Southern Command had literally gone in March 1941. Right, we're not building pillboxes apart from in these very specific in very specific cases. Move on to building trenches instead in March 1941. Really, really cool. So, I'm aware that this is not a very quick vid, even though I'm calling it a quick vid. Let's start to draw this presentation to a close, and I've still got some conclusions to go through as well. Right. So, in his research in 1996, Dobinson concluded that pillboxes were built during a 20-month period. Though from what I've seen and presented here, I think we can reduce this to about 18 months based on the information from the Royal Engineer Field Companies. But what is interesting is that he surmises here that the majority of pillboxes were built during this first 16-week period of this 20-month period, which is really interesting because, you know, I can't corroborate this so far, but it's worth considering in terms of pillbox construction that pillboxes were actually built in an even shorter space of time, practically, and officially they were built officially within a relatively, you know, a slightly longer period of time. But, you know, it's interesting that I find here that Dobinson outlines that most pillboxes were built within a 16-week period, which is really, really, really interesting. So as we've seen, this period of construction was much shorter in some commands, like Southern Command. However, more research, and this is a vital thing, is required to tie down the construction periods within which each command and even sub-command level decided to build pillboxes, because I'm fairly certain there'll be a lot of variation in the point where commands decided that pillboxes weren't practical anymore. So let's start looking at some conclusions. Right. So having considered all this, it's worth now, you know, I think I've demonstrated here quite well that the pillbox itself had a very short shelf life, as I call it, within the anti-invasion defences of the UK. From my perspective, and what I'll say is that the pillbox was pretty much a boom and bust structure. It was built quickly to meet the immediate needs of the regular and territorial army units deployed in the Home Forces in mid-1940, allowing them to concentrate troops where they were needed and provide them with adequate protection, as well as protecting their somewhat limited equipment and weapon systems in 1940, at least, following the fall of France, where a lot of equipment had been left behind. So the pillbox was a way of quickly concentrating forces and offering protection for the troops from what was seen as an imminent invasion that could take place as early as September 1940. From the documents and the orders we've seen, there was clearly a constant assessment and reassessment of the effectiveness of pillboxes throughout their period of use, with plans outlined to bolster and thicken existing pillboxes in 1941 so that they could withstand heavier enemy weapon systems. By early 1942, the practicality of modifying pillboxes and building them to meet the current fielded enemy weapon systems was deemed unfeasible for the reasons I've outlined in the provided documents, and their construction was abandoned and their use recommended to be limited as practically as possible in the field, with earthworks and trench-based positions recommended to take priority unless the area they were required unless the area in which they were required was already occupied by a pillbox. As we've seen, Dobinson, writing in 1996, summarised that pillboxes were constructed within a 20-month construction period, dating from, I'm guessing, around May 1940 to March 1942. But we've seen that this is possibly even a shorter period, looking at about 18 months from June 1940 to March 1942. Dobinson also outlined that the majority of pillboxes were built during the first 16 weeks of this period as well, which is something that needs a bit more clarification on. But I think it's, given the validity of Dobinson's work and how accurate it's been with his other stuff, I think that's probably going to stand up to scrutiny. So as I've highlighted, it's possible that this period was much shorter and may have been even shorter at a localised level. It's worth me, you know, drawing attention again to Southern Command, at least, that they had at least halted their construction of pillboxes in March 1941, just after 9 months of after construction had started. But they did recommend that pillboxes continue to be built for the defence of airfields, MAP establishments, and areas where pillboxes could be fully concealed. So although construction was halted and their use discouraged from 1942, this also doesn't mean that pillboxes fell completely out of use during the rest of the period in which the anti-invasion defences were active, primarily from 1942 to 44. At the very most, you know, 1944 represents kind of the top end of anti-invasion defence use at the very latest. So, from evidence I've seen, some pillboxes continued to remain in use in existing defence schemes. A good example being the defence plans drawn up by the Home Guard in Beaulieu in the New Forest in 1943, which showed pillboxes continue to be used in an urban landscape for defence. And it's possibly because of this urban landscape and urban environment that was not conducive to the construction of new trench-based systems that the pillboxes in Beaulieu, for example, continued in use. But I have to point out, by 1943, the threat of imminent invasion had also already been determined as to be over, as I've highlighted elsewhere in my other videos. So as a result of this, further localised research needs to be undertaken to identify the chronology of pillbox use within a given area and identify which examples remained in use after their use was no longer officially recommended. So the limited period of construction and use of pillboxes raises some interesting questions that should be looked at in the future. So these are just me reeling off some kind of like research questions to look at and prioritise later on. Firstly, at a national level, as outlined by the GHQ Home Forces Order, the pillbox was officially, my words, deemed obsolete in February 1942 and was discouraged from being used in the period after that, meaning that the pillboxes that had already been built were deemed to be redundant and only to be used if no alternative was available. But to what extent, and here's one of the questions, but to what extent did the pillbox remain in use after this period? So we have a generally fixed period from June 1940 from my research to February 1942 that the pillbox was officially used. But to what extent did the pillbox pillboxes pre and post date this period, if at all? During 1942, the pillbox was no longer deemed fit for purpose, and defence would be undertaken from, where possible, trenches and prepared fighting positions based around trenches from now on. How visible is this in the landscape today, and can local trends of change be identified today? From my research into East Yorkshire's defences, which has been based on using aerial photographs taken in 1940 and 41, for example, in my survey area of Filey Bay, which is one of the areas I highlighted in terms of the Royal Engineers earlier, trenches by and large outnumbered pillboxes. I think I've got some like 40 pillboxes identified and 75 slit trenches in this period of 1940 and 41. So did the period of 1942 actually see much in the way of change take place at a localised level, or was this something that had already been done? This is a question that could do with being answered. Right. So a question I'll also be looking at later on is how long linear defences such as the GHQ line were in use for. As it's currently not clear, but in the documents I currently have and I'm currently looking through, the general date points to the GHQ line falling out of use by mid-1941. So was this recommendation for the construction of shell-proof pillbox designs in early 1941 something that influenced construction of shell-proof pillboxes within the GHQ line? Or was this something that influenced construction of shell-proof pillbox designs in given areas before this? Or is this a case of shell-proof pillboxes only been built after this recommendation was issued in April and May 1941? Can we answer this question? Can this give us, as well from an archaeological perspective, a terminus post-quem or a terminus ante-quem for the construction of shell-proof pillboxes? Can this be inferred, for example? Also, it wouldn't be one of my videos if I didn't mention the Home Guard and their mythology. In general, it wasn't until like late 1941 to 1943 that the Home Guard started to take on a more primary and active responsibility for localised defence. Knowing that pillbox use was being discouraged during this period, this must further limit the interaction the Home Guard had with pillboxes. And although some pillboxes were definitely allotted to the Home Guard, and some defence schemes showed pillboxes in use by the Home Guard in 1943, pillboxes were by no means exclusively used by the Home Guard, and certainly weren't built or designed for the use of the Home Guard weapons or the weapon systems issued to them. So the link between the Home Guard and pillboxes is largely a modern one, but this finite use of pillboxes in defence must call into question further the limited interaction the Home Guard had with pillboxes. And it shows as well that much more research must be undertaken to identify the units that actually used pillboxes, rather than just instantly assuming they were used by the Home Guard. So this is something I'll probably look at in more detail in a future video, potentially during the Defensive Strategy series. But I want to get to the bottom of what interaction the Home Guard actually had with pillboxes, because I'm fairly certain that it was extremely limited, especially given how many pillboxes were built. Anyway, so just to kind of finalise, the fact that pillboxes fell out of use relatively quickly further exemplifies that the defences and defensive strategy for defending the UK against invasion during the Second World War was fluid, with the defensive strategies and the structures of the defensive networks constantly being reassessed and adapted to meet an evolving invasion threat and the development of enemy weapon systems and tactics. So this kind of flies in the face of the common erroneous belief that the defences were simply built as part of a rigid, static and outmoded defensive strategy, or that pillboxes were built simply to pacify the population for propaganda purposes. So the what I call the "they built them to keep the people happy" myth is something that I'll cover in later videos. It needs addressing separately because it needs a lot of detail to go into that. But it's something that keeps on cropping up, is that, oh yeah, pillboxes were built to make the local population happy. This is not reflected in the documents at all, and it's very clear that they were built to meet the threat of invasion, not to pacify the population. But today, for some reason, the defences are often dismissed out of hand and rarely taken seriously. So, there we have it. The pillbox itself was only officially built for a period of around 18 months, spanning the period from June 1940 to February 1942. As always, I hope that's been interesting. I notice I've just gone on for 40 minutes now. This isn't a quick vid, but I hope that's been interesting. I hope that makes you think about pillboxes a bit more often, and hopefully will draw some attention to the limited shelf life of the pillbox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.